My name is Mark Adcock. I am based in Charlottesville, Virginia. I am a Salesforce, they changed the name on it, so it's not Lightning Champions, it is Platform Champions. So I'm a Salesforce Platform Champion, an MVP. I co-lead the Charlottesville, Virginia community group. We're actually one of the ones that's the user group because we're big enough to have one group, and so we switched our name back to user group when they made that available because we have a mixture of people. And I am currently a senior consultant at Aperio. I specialize in kind of nonprofit and higher education, but I do work with a lot of other things. The weather in Virginia is kind of miserable, so my background is this lovely beach with a palm tree because it's much more cheerful than the weather outside right now. And what I shared in the chat here is my trailblazer.me profile. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I love connecting with people in the community, so feel free to reach out to me and get connected.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. And I'll just introduce our sponsors. Our sponsors today are Bug Tech, the tech solution provider. Our community support is through SheForce WIT. SheForce Women in Tech is a group that supports women in the tech community and women who do want to get into the tech community. Again, as always, I would love if you could spread the word, share the knowledge. These are the Twitter handles that we have. Please go ahead and spread the word. The person who has the highest number of shares would get a prize. Let's start and succeed together. Mark, do you want me to give you the control?
Sure.
I'll stop sharing.
All right. Okay. All right, so I've got host disabled participant screen sharing. So if you can enable that. All right. So back into me, as I mentioned, I am 14 times certified. I do have to change that. I specialize in nonprofit and education, but that does not actually mean a whole lot because right now, like I'm on a telecom client. Let's jump into flows, and I keep this as a fairly hands-on. One thing I would like to mention about my general presentation style is feel free to ask questions. Feel free to point stuff out in chat. Feel free to unmute and ask a question if you want. I try to keep these sessions really interactive. I want to be able to hear from people and feel like everyone's kind of like understanding and knowing what's going on here and have a chance to ask questions. So feel free to jump right in. Do not feel like you have to wait till the very end. This is going to be kind of a beginning flow session towards some of the intermediate stuff. So some of it, what I'll be talking about is kind of your intro to flow. Some of this will be getting into a little bit more flows, and I'll show you some of the different kind of sample flows I've built here to solve certain business use cases. So for those who don't know, you can get into flows here from this flow builder. A lot of people often ask, and the place where I want to start is often people go, why do I go with flow with process builder? One, longer term process builder is going away, and it's not happening right away. It's not happening soon, but there's a lot of things that you can do with flow that you can't do with process builder. The kind of key things to start off with when you're looking at creating a new flow, the things that process builder does and does well is basically a record changes and an if this then that type of fashion. So it gets this criteria, this criteria, this criteria, but flows give you a lot more flexibility in what you can do. So for example, you have here, your options are Screenflow. And with a Screenflow, this is a place where you might do a custom lightning component, or you might have a Visualforce page. Some cases you don't need to do something custom. Some cases you can actually use flows to do this and combine them with lightning components and other things. But this is a point where you're showing something to a user and asking feedback from them. One place I just used a Screenflow is actually in a login, and this is for a community where basically they have to come in in order to get into the community, they have to actually say, yes, I agree to the community guidelines. So basically, the don't be a jerk in our community, they have to actually agree to that when they come in. Lawyers happen to love agreement to things when they bring people into an environment. Your schedule triggered flows. So these are scheduled, and they used to call them just scheduled flows, and now they are scheduled triggered flows. The idea being is that these can happen at a specified point in time. So before the schedule triggered flows, what you either had to do was some really kind of clunky workarounds of when this happens, then do this a week later type of stuff, or you had to go back to batch Apex. And the nice thing about these schedule triggered flows is that you can actually say, like, every night, I want you to go through the accounts and find, this is the use case we'll have later, but you go through the accounts and find people who accounts that don't have any activities on them recently that have been more than 90 days, and send them an email to tell them to contact their customer. Or if you have been talking to the customer, go ahead and make sure you put those activities in. Your auto launched flows, these are kind of your bread and butter backend. So you can think of these are being called from something else. Anywhere that it says auto launched, assume it's being called by something else. It's either being called by a process builder, it's being invoked by an API, it's being come here. These are headless flows, as they're often called, meaning they don't have any screens. These always have to run in the back end. They're always automatic. In fact, the only one that can have a screen is a Screenflow. The rest of these are all headless and run behind the scenes. The auto launch means it's called by someone else, something else. It's not triggered by a database action like a schedule item or by a record change. The record triggered flows are from a record change. So these can actually be before and after, and we'll show that a little bit later. And then your last type is this platform event. These are most useful in kind of integrations, or if you're one of those people that your organization is moving to kind of a package-based management, these platform event triggered flows actually allow you to do kind of a loosely coupled thing so that you can send a message in one piece of your environment and respond to it with a flow here and not have to care about what's in between. That's a really powerful thing for trying to make it so that you have a lot of flexibility. So if you need to prototype with a flow and then eventually replace with Apex, you can. To start off, let's go in our Screenflow first. You'll have two options when you come into your Screenflows. The first one is this freeform. It's the old style of flow builder. You can lay it out however you want. You can do all kinds of things. The key thing to keep in mind here when you choose freeform is this can get to be a real mess. And it's not as easy to follow. So if you're new to building flows, a lot of cases the auto layout is better because this is going to put it into a tree format. What I'm going to do right now is temporarily turn off the auto layout so you can see things here. And you'll notice here on the left-hand side in your flow builder, you've got your elements panel and you have the resource manager for the different things that you're using inside this flow. Your elements panel, think about this piece here as these elements. If you look at the kind of the model view controller model of development, this is your model pieces here. This is your data. Your logic elements here, these are kind of your controller. And your interactions, unfortunately, these screen items are basically your view piece. Where this sort of breaks down on the interactions was when they stuck actions and subflows in here. A subflow will let you call another flow, either a screen flow or an auto launched flow to do some extra work. An action is actually a piece that gets programmatically created, and actions let you do things that you couldn't normally do in flows. So one of the cases for an action here is frequently people run into this, the assignment rules. You use cases, and the assignment rules don't run if you create a case a certain way and you want them to run. You could actually use an action to do that because it requires requires using Apex code in order to make that happen. Because for most people this is not as intuitive, I'm going to switch back to the auto layout, which takes away that elements section and puts it right here. And the idea is, instead of dragging things around on the canvas, you can actually create stuff and put in a screen element here and add stuff here. You can take and put in an action or subflow if you want to run stuff. Most cases with the majority of flows, if you're talking about working on an existing record, you'll come down here and do your get record. If you're talking about starting off with a new record, you usually start off with a screen element here. So let's jump into a screen element here. And before we kind of dive into creating any flows, does anyone have any questions here? You're a very quiet group, so.
Can I have a question? Can you tell me the difference between screen action and soft flow? I am especially between screen and action. Usually when we use a screen, when we use action.
Sure. So a screen is where you can present or get information from a user. This place you can pick from your stuff, and you can do a multi-select pick list. If you really want to club a baby seal, I hate multi-select pick lists. You'll never find me recommending these without qualifying them repeatedly. The actions are things that are kind of predefined from code. So in this case, when you're using an action, you're coming in here and doing something like, I want to send an email. And so here's an email action. I've got this send email, and I can specify things that go into the email here. Or I can come in here and do this, make a new task as a quick action here. So actions could be quick actions, they could be things that are made in code, etc. They could be multiple things. So what happens if, for example, I do this action here? I can make a new task, and I can specify things on it from a task record. Now, if anyone's ever tried to create tasks from flows before, sometimes this is a little clunky to use the create records, whereas this can often be better. But you can use these to kind of quick actions and map things very rapidly versus some other stuff. We've got some different things. You can do various activities with knowledge articles, for example. Various different packages will come in. So for example, you may have actions that come from, if you put a payment processor in your system like Chargent or Linvio Payments or something like that, they will often have actions that you can do that will go along with those. So anywhere that you're trying to get feedback from a person, you're going to use a screen. Anywhere you're trying to do something, an action is something that's been pre-declared, either a quick action or something programmatic from Apex. A subflow is essentially another flow that you want to build. So you can use an auto-launched flow that may be called from somewhere else. It could be a Screenflow where you go down it, or it could be something where it's already been built out, and say I had a reset password here that have now gotten the information in it, and I want that to be reusable, and I'm using that in multiple flows. So your auto-launched flows are really your reusable components. That's the separation of that logic, so you don't have to build it all into one flow. You can build it into an auto-launched flow and then reuse it.
Great, thanks.
So let's start off here, and I'm going to do a really simple flow to begin with. I want to collect some information about someone. So one of the things that often happens, let's take a step back and look at this from a business user context here. So I have my, service will work for this. So I have a contact, and every time that we talk to a contact, we want to make sure certain information is up to date. So say I look at my contact Arthur Song here, and I want to keep their information up to date. I want to make sure they've gotten their phone numbers up to date, etc. I can have a flow that I can put in and have it in several different ways and make sure that this gets tracked and say, okay, how do I want this to work? So if I come in here and I want to make sure people are presented, I have a certain option, and I'll show this in a minute. So let's start building here and go, okay, my first thing is I'm going to need to use the Screenflow. If I want to capture their information, I'm going to do this. All right. Notice one of the things about the flow builder, some cases you have label, some places you only have API name. Generally, if you have label, it's going to do the nice thing of switching it to the snake case and put the underscores instead of spaces. If it doesn't have that and it's only API, it will make you name it to a way that fits. There's a couple of inconsistencies on these, and they're working on replacing them. There's actually a brand new thing that is now in Winter 21, or coming in Spring 21, which is fully supported, which is the custom properties editors. And so you'll find these coming on more and more flow components in the future, where it gets much prettier and easier to set up. The things that you can do here, you can show the header, which will show whatever you have as a label for the flow. Show the footer, the navigation. Generally, if you hide the footer, the only reason why is because they're either not going to move forward or back, or because you're going to replace it with your own navigation. And I will show you a little bit later where you can actually get a component to customize your navigation if you want. The navigation options you get out of the box control, whether they can pause or not, whether they can hit next or finish, or whether they can hit previous. Maybe I don't want them to be able to go back. Maybe I only want them to go forward. One of the things to keep in mind is this doesn't necessarily update, so it doesn't know that this screen might be the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 17th. So we'll still always say finish there. But note, when you run your flow, it'll actually say next or finish. The thing that you can do here is you've got a lot of things for input and basically one thing for output. Spring 21 has a new feature, Safe Harbor, but within your current one, you have the inputs where you're expecting people to enter stuff and your outputs. Note, you can actually populate these fields though. So in just a second, we'll do that. But let's start off with some display text here. And we're going to do the so notice here, again, one of those made me do the API name, made me put the spaces in, did not help me out at all. But you know, we're just giving them some guidelines here. We're explaining why they're seeing this and what's going on. If anyone's ever dealt with kind of sales reps before or customer service reps, if they don't have a reason why they're doing it and a requirement to do that, they will not do it. It just happens. So one of the things here now, if I want to make this record specific, and here's the thing, I want to know that it is this particular user, I need to go ahead and create a specific resource here. And you'll have this with flow sometimes. There is in the you have some default variables that come into your flows, for example, that you can use to do stuff. And sometimes you will have to kind of come in and capture these and put them in. In this case, what I'm going to do is one called record ID. And I'm going to just create a variable here. I'm going to call it record ID. And this is text. And it's going to be available for input. The reason why is because something outside of this, I'm going to call this from this page in some way, and I need to know which page I'm calling it from. So by creating this variable called record ID, I now have the ID that this particular page, this particular flow was called from when I specifically ran it.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Sure.
I saw a record type. Was there a record type ID as well? Or when you went back to the variable and you picked the type?
So
And you picked text as the type. Was there also another type that said ID?
there is,
And I was just curious why you picked text instead of the ID.
text is more versatile.
Okay.
You can come in here and you can choose to do a variable, and you can actually choose to do, yeah, there's no
Oh, there wasn't.
ID field, no.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
I think it may have been a pre-fill from something else where I was typing, but it's not, it's just text.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and you can pick from a record, you can pick a record choice set, pick list choice set, etc. But you can't do these are kind of special things. So this record choice set is not it's not what you think it is from a creation of this to pull things in. It won't do the single record. Right now, what we need to do, this is a set of records. So when I come in here, I've got the allow multiple values, I've got text, I've got available for input, because I want to be able to have stuff. The thing is, all I've got is the ID right now. So Salesforce, a lot of cases, what it's doing, it's just passing you an ID. This is where a lot of people get stuck when they try to build their first Screenflow, because it's coming from a record, but it doesn't know what record it is. The catch here is that before I get to this screen, or before I try to use stuff from that record, I have to come in here and do a get records. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this get contact record. Reason why is because I just want to know what this is or what it's coming from. And now I'm going to say contact. Do here. Anyone who's a developer who's worked with SOQL queries, what you might realize is this is a get record is just doing the SOQL query. So now what I'm going to come in here is I'm going to specify, and for the contact, I want the ID of the contact to be equal to my record ID variable. And now that I've done this, when this comes in, it's going to get the first record, because there should only be one with a single ID. If you've got multiple records with the same ID in your Salesforce org, you got problems. And I'm going to automatically store all fields. The thing to note here is this does not actually store all fields. It only stores the fields that you use within the flow. So if I use on my contact, if I use their 3 phone number fields and an email address field and their shipping address, but not the mailing address, it will only grab the fields that I specify. So don't worry about it. From an optimization perspective, it's not taking every field on your contact or account or whatever record. A lot of times people worry about that being kind of slow, particularly because, you know, I've seen quite a few orgs that have like 600 fields on their account record. You don't want to pull them all into your query. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm going to do a get record. The nice thing is that from anywhere else in my flow, this becomes a record single variable. So I can immediately come in here and I can reference this later on as my contact when I want to change it, update it, go through it, etc. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to create a screen, and now I want to collect some information from them. Because I did that get record, I can use the information from here. So if I want to capture, say, their phone, and here we go. So we've got phone, and I'm going to call this work phone because what here, interesting enough, these labels are reversed. So if I come in here and do this, because I already typed there, it's not going to take it. On the other hand, if label is first, it will fill it out for you. These side panels over here are a kind of a big frustration. Let's talk about what our different things are. The label is what appears above the phone field. The nice thing about this is with a flow, sometimes I can make something that's more user-friendly. So I could actually call this phone number where you work. And it'll take it. One of the things that changed from a speed perspective is that it does not update here in the flow. So if I want to see the change that I've made in my other stuff, I'll have to actually run the flow. From a pattern perspective, you can set up a regular expression and say, okay, I want it to be this. So if you only want to accept phone numbers that are in the US, you can use regex and have it only take US phone numbers. You can also do placeholder text and say, something like that. When you've got some of these other fields, read only and required, these are a little bit odd for most people. So one of the things to keep in mind are these are basically checkboxes, but instead of getting a checkbox, you have to come in here and choose from this value here. So you get this global constant true or global constant false. This is essentially checked or unchecked. Read only, I want this to not be read only. I want them to be able to edit it. Required, maybe I do want them to have a phone number there and not let it go without it. The value, here's where I have an opportunity. So I can actually take this and map it to stuff from my contact. So again, here I've got my record single variable, my contact from get contact record. I can come in here and I can choose, I can type phone, and it's going to give me all my options for fields. I can also specify certain visibility requirements to say whether or not I want it to show, when I want it to show, etc. And I can manually assign variables. Oops. So one of the things to keep in mind here is that all these screens have to have a label. So let's talk about this. This is the, I'll call this input screen, because I'm going to be able to reference this later and the things that I put here. So I want to be able to make sure I can come back to this. Again, I can control the navigation and other stuff here on a screen by screen basis. And here's a very simple flow now. So when I go to create this, one key thing here, save, always save. So this is our update. And I'm going to call this here because I'm going to go back to another one that's more robust here in just a second. And in my advanced period here. So one of the things that's nice about flows is I actually have some options now that I didn't have before. So I get some context variables when I choose here up under my advanced. So this is actually really cool. So user or system context. This means if I start it from a screen and I'm a user, it runs as me as the user, and I can only see and do what I as a user can do. Or it runs as a system. That means it was called from somewhere else. Now, Screenflows can't be called from somewhere else. So this one will always run as a user. But say I have a circumstance where within a specific flow, within a specific confined set of processes, I want to allow a person to update things they normally can't. I can actually switch down here to system context. And in system context, I can actually have them access to fields they wouldn't normally have access to. And in this case, I can access fields and objects that I might not normally have access to, but only via the flow and only for the activities that are in the flow. Or in this case, with record level access, or this one that allows them to see data that they would not normally see potentially. So you have to be really careful when using these system contexts because they're very powerful, but they can also potentially allow people to see records they wouldn't normally be able to see. I actually had a circumstance where people were using a flow with a client, and they had circumstances where the owner of a parent case may not be able to see all the child cases, but they wanted them to see certain details about the child cases. We could use a flow with this without sharing would allow them to see those other cases or see the details we chose to present within the flow. Now, they can't go to that case outside of the flow. They click outside of the flow, they would not see that, but they could see certain details on those cases from within that flow itself. This is similar to stuff you can do within Lightning components. So this is a really versatile tool for being able to work with things that used to require a lot of extra custom development, a Visualforce page, a Lightning component, etc. This case, these are all things the user should have access to. So I'm going to go with a user. Your type, you can switch this, but only after certain points. When you're doing the save, the initial save. Otherwise, you have to save as a new version. Your API version, this is kind of cool and it comes in handy. Have any of you ever had where your developer sandbox was on spring 21 and your production environment was on winter 20? A lot of us are getting ready to face that in about a month or so. This will let you specify the API version. So I can say, okay, I'm going to run this as version 49, and version 49 is going to be the summer 20, whereas this one is winter 21. And so if my sandboxes didn't match, I'd still be able to deploy my flow. This is a really kind of critical thing for being able to keep things running and keep things from breaking in between different versions of the API. So this is a going forward thing. There's no version 48 because that feature didn't exist. However, going forward, 49 will still be there, 50 will be there, and when sandboxes get upgraded or when orgs get upgraded to support spring 21, 51 will be there, 52. How many different versions they support hasn't been let out, but this will give you kind of some level of compatibility with how your flow runs for a longer period of time. This is something that's been doable with Apex and with Lightning components, but has not been doable with flows until now. So flows are getting way more powerful. Screenflows especially have lots of utility here. This flow interview, this is basically the label of how this flow would go if it gets saved or when it runs or the other stuff. Frequently, this is the out of the box, but a lot of cases I like to customize this and give myself whatever information I, as an administrator, might need to help troubleshoot this if an error message comes through, because this is some of the pieces that are going to be in my error message. Now, once I save this, it's going to give me some different things. All right, so I've got some warnings here. My first warning, the screen includes screen components that require Lightning runtime. If you see this error message, does not mean that your environment is going to be incompatible, but it may be a warning to make sure that you're using the Lightning runtime for flows. If you don't have that currently, you can turn that on and process automation settings. While talking about process automation settings, this is one that I find really a lot of people end up not knowing about, and it comes in extremely handy. If you look at your process automation settings here, you can specify your workflow user, automated process user email address, what happens here. The particular one on Lightning runtime is here for this option. Whether or not they can resume interviews that are paused, whether or not they can be paused or resume. Here's the pieces that go along with that. But one of the ones that's really useful is you have here. So a lot of people, user who modified the last process or flow. This is really useful in your development environment where you might have people building in the same sandbox. So you want the person who's working on that particular flow to get the notice. But in your production and your shared sandboxes like your UAT, staging, integration testing sandboxes, really the option you want to use is this one, your Apex email exception email recipients. And the nice thing here is that anyone who's in this Apex exception email group or otherwise can get these messages and will know what's going on with the flow. So this is one I highly recommend looking into for your production environments. Just as an aside, but this is really a useful way to go. You can send to an external email address. Frequently what I do is I have a distribution list that I use for this, or you can use Salesforce users you can add to it. Back to the flow builder. So I can run my flow, I can see how it looks, I can see what's happening here. But the case is I'm just getting some text, right? Could not find the get contact record resource. Wah, wah. All right, so anyone have an idea why I'm getting this? Any guesses? Y'all being quiet, so I'm going to try to put someone on the spot. So the problem is this is supposed to come from a record page, but if I hit the run, it's not coming from a record page. It just runs. But if I hit debug, I'm able to specify any input variables that I have. So I can come in here and I can say, I can come back and grab Arthur Song's record ID here, and I can put this in under debug. And now when I come in, it's going to tell me here. The nice thing about this debug is that you actually get details of what's going on. All right, so now I saw here, it ran that page and I hit next, and then it did a lookup and found the result. Notice again, the only fields that it got from the contact record were phone and ID, because I haven't used any other fields. And it populated here because I had mapped this here. I had specified the phone number from this get contact record. What if I hadn't done this? That would be blank, and it would show the text. So now if I save this, again, one thing to keep in mind, it's going to keep doing this until I save. It's not changing my version. Womp womp again. Okay, so you have to close it and open again after you save, because it's going to make you run the different version. If you have lots of input variables, stick them in a text file and have them handy, Word document, something or other, so you can just cut and paste and go, because you'll go back to these often. Notice now that I don't have a number there, it's giving my example text that I put in. But it's just example text. As soon as I type, it's gone. Now I finish. All right, so I can change my inputs, I can run again, I can try this a bunch of different ways. One of the things that you'll notice though, Arthur's phone number is still the same. And the reason why is because the last things that I need to do are update the record. See, I got that contact record, but I didn't update it. This is one of the things that does make Process Builder easier, because it assumes you're updating the record. Flow does not make that assumption. You can get a record and not update it. So here the thing is, what I want to do, I can do a update records piece here. And so now I can come in and I'm going to update the contact record. Okay, so here I can select my contact, and now I can just do. All right, so now what? Well, here's the thing. If I do this, there's a couple ways that I can do this. So if you have a more complex flow and you want to update it as you go along, the way to do this is to add an assignment variable. Because what's happened here is that I haven't actually updated my contact record. So I'm going to add phone number to contact. I'm keeping my name something that I can tell what it is. And I'm going to take this piece here. I'm going to tell it this contact and the phone equals, from here, I'm going to select from my things that I've got. And I have on my screen components, I've got work phone. And note what it's giving me here is options. I've got the label, pattern, placeholder, read only, required. Well, I don't want any of these here, because these are values that were set on it. What I want is the value. So I don't want to write the configuration of stuff. I want to write this screen component, that value to this record. Now, if I update the contact record, it'll have that. Say I don't want to do that, or it's a really simple flow and I just want to map things at the end. You can also come in here and do this specify conditions. And here, now I can do contact. And now if I come in, I can do this and I can say, all right, so contact ID equals the ID from here. Now notice one of the things that's happening here, Anyone have any idea? Anyone from a programmatic background want to say what they're seeing is potentially a problem here? So one of the things I want to highlight is I'm essentially doing the same SOQL query twice. I'm getting the record and then I'm getting it again if I do this. So you typically want to use the assignment variables to be as optimal as possible. But if you need to create a record or update a record and you want to be really specific about it without using an assignment, you can do this. And so you can come in here and put in a phone, and here I'm going to add, again, same thing. I can do a manual assignment in here. It's just not the ideal. You usually want to do your assignment in assignment elements because one, it's easier to find them and read them, and two, it's easier to come in here. So this is where we've done this. What I want to do here, instead of working on this flow a little bit further, I want to go back to my other flows because I want to show you one that's a little bit more robust and one that I've built out in a couple different ways, so you can do some different things with it. So the
Mark, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Like the variables that you create, can you use them in other flows?
You can't. They exist only within the context of that flow.
Oh, okay. And is there some kind of update that you're aware of that would be coming, that we could use them in future? Just
Nope.
Okay.
No, and part of this is it's the same kind of thing that you get into with your Apex code.
Right.
Those variables exist just in the memory of the flow. They don't really exist elsewhere. They're not created as forms or anything else like that. So.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So I'm going to jump into one of these that's a little bit more, and in some cases that's actually advantageous because you don't want them to live elsewhere. You don't want them to be here. You can build formula fields inside your flow that only exist in the flow. So you don't need to eat actually a field on your object to do calculations for certain things. And one of the ones I will show you here in a little bit as a scheduled flow makes this easier. So this is one that I did, which is a little bit more advanced. You'll see this go through here. I worked with a lot of other fields here. So this one, let's run it again. And we'll talk about Arthur Song again here. So in this case, I did something a little bit different. So notice, I made this more personal. I did the get contact up front. It's got the same thing. It's using the record ID and it's running that query. And it's automatically saving. But notice it's getting more fields because I use more fields in the flow. You'll also notice here it says, welcome, Mark. So one of the things to keep in mind with text is you can actually use merge fields. So you can put in things here and get stuff from the flow itself. So you can get stuff on the user who's running it and say, get their first name, which is what I did here. You can do things like which profile they're running up under or which record it is if it's coming from certain places. So you can use these global variables as well as other stuff from the contact record. You know, so I could put in here we'll be capturing key information about, all right, so instead of a contact, I'm going to say we can use to update key information or about, let's say here, I'm going to put in this field and information about, nope, wrong place. All right, what did I do? All right, so here about, instead of a contact, also one of the things when you're dealing with these longer stuff, it helps you can slide this out over here. And so instead of this, I'm going to do this from this get contact record, and I'm going to do full name here. So Now when I come through here, I've got a merge field, and so when I run this and it's saved version, it's going to have the contact name there. So you can use merge fields to make these things more useful, fewer clicks, more tailored to the person who's running it, etc. These are all really useful things. So now that I've updated this, and I saved it, and I've got it here, you might notice that because this one was active, my only option is to save as. I have to make a new version of this to do the edit. One of the things to keep in mind is that this is not a new flow per se, which I can make a new flow from this, and that's the typical save as. But if I save as a new version, the thing that I'm doing is I'm not given as many options to change stuff because it's active already, and it's not letting me rename it because, again, it's a new version of this. But what I can do is my end users who have been using this can keep using this flow, and until I activate it, while I'm testing and building this and debugging it, I can keep working on this plain one, and the users can come in here and go through this. So now when I come in and run this, here we'll be updating key information about Arthur's song, right? So we've now leveraged this information. You'll notice also this is a much more advanced flow. I've used a bunch of different components here. Let's talk about these Screenflow components that we have for just a minute. So the ones I've chosen here are the phone, but notice I've done it twice. So I've said home phone and mobile phone that I've gotten here on this one. I've got an address. The thing to note about address is that you actually have to map each individual field. So while it shows up as one pretty simple component, you actually have to go through and map it and say, okay, this is the postal code that I want you to use. This is the mailing address, etc. My email address. But here's some of the other things that you can do. So you may have had people ask for they don't want to see the pick list. They want to see a radio buttons. So within a flow, you can actually do this. You can put in a pick list, or you can actually show radio buttons. And you can give them a different set of choices here from the contact list. So if I came in, I could actually choose from a choice set, and I can make a choice set here. And I can call a pick list choice set. And let's see, what's a good pick list here on my contact record? Have I got a good pick list here? Lead source. Right, I want to get these options in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is going to be lead source choices. And now I can come here and I can do the contact. And now I'm going to select my field. Pick list, if it's going to be a radio buttons, it's a pick list typically, because you can only save one item with a radio button. If it's a multi-select pick list, which is a terrible word and I don't recommend using them, but if you have a multi-select pick list, you can actually use the other option, which is the checkbox group, and they work the same way. So now I'm going to pick this here and lead source. I've got my default order, ascending order or descending order, so I can choose how I want to show this. And now what will happen is when I run this flow in a saved version, oops, I didn't give it a name. Okay, so I can put this in here, and now if I save this, nope, because I updated it, I've got to come back out here and do debug. And I'm going to give it this value here. All right, so now I've got this coming in. So now instead of a pick list, I've got radio buttons. This is really cool because a lot of people want to see all the options on a pick list all the time and not have to go, okay, well, which of these 6 options did it come from? The other thing I've run into is the multi-select or the checkbox group. This is another component you can use here, the checkbox group, which works the same way, only instead of the radio buttons, it lets you have multiple checkboxes. and they can say, okay, this one, this one, this one, this one. You still have all the same horrible problems of multi-select pick lists. So I kind of hate using this. There is a good use case for it with other stuff. You can put independent pick lists. You've got image display. You've got a file upload that you can do to get a file from them. You've got your long text area they can enter into. You've got lookup fields that they can use to look stuff up in multi-select pick list. There's lots of different ways that you can represent this information. You know, true or false, put in as a toggle, yes or no, instead of the checkbox. So I could put in a toggle here of this and say, okay, now let me get into, let's look at what's a good field for a checkbox here on contact. Can email or can call? Oh, wait, I've already got one here in this flow, so I'm not going to use this one. So I'm going to drop my lead source because I don't like that one, and I'm going to move on here. Note again, we can map, we can do other stuff, we can change the label. So this one says preferred email instead of others. If I come into my next screen, this is a consent capture. So really when GDPR came out, a lot of companies started going, do we have your permission? So here I have this, and I'm showing this as a checkbox. And I have this, do I have your consent for blah, 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 blah. The script, legal tends to be very touchy about what they want you to say. So they tend to do this. But maybe instead of where I've got my checkbox, I want to give them something snazzy, and I want to let them do a toggle. So this is label. I can do this. Customer consented to receiving calls. And customer, let's do this, because I'm going to have to give it another one to the other one if I want to do this. And the active label, this is where it appears. So I can have it say customer consented. And the inactive label, I don't want disabled. I want inactive label is does not consent. And my value, I want them to have to check this one every time. So let's take a look at this when I save it in the flow and look at this here. All right, so now I've got 2 warnings. And that's because I've added other components that require the Lightning runtime. As you add other components in, you will find that you'll get these warnings. The warnings are okay. You don't have to pay too much attention to them, read through them. When you have something that's an error, that will actually keep you from running it. So let's debug my flow and see how this looks here. I'm going to commit here, and I'm going to come in. I'm going to run this, and now I've got my nice pretty screens back the way that I had it. Oh, but look, but instead of a checkbox, I could do this. Customer consents to receiving calls. Customer consented. Customer does not consent. So I could show it as a toggle instead of a checkbox. It's just a different way of showing things. Some cases you can get more attention from people if you switch things around and go, okay, here's my toggle, here's my not toggle, right? This is just ways to think about this. Again, your standard Salesforce field, no toggle, but a flow, I can give them that. Maybe you have a rating system of 1 to 10. Well, one of the nice things about this is another component here is this slider, and you can pick a range on it and go, how satisfied are you? You can also put some text in it. This is a regular text field. You can put a URL that's clickable, and then you've got your display text. So these are your typical things you're going to have on here. I like the toggle, but I'm going to stick with my checkbox because that's what our people are used to, and I'm trying not to disrupt them. So I'm going to save this back. One thing to keep in mind is this flow needs to be activated for the version that I have, or else it's not going to go. So let's talk about where people can run this flow. So if I want them to see this flow and have it run, right now it's over here and it's in this place, or here where you can run it. This is not convenient for end users. It's great for you from a testing perspective, but if I'm an end user, I want it right here on my record. So the first thing I did was I actually created a button here that will run this flow. Notice it's coming in. It's the one I just did. And I've got my Arthur song here. It's coming in. It's giving me my information, and I can run it. Let's quickly talk about how we set this up. Used to be this was much more of a pain to do these, but they made it a lot easier to add in actions and flows here. So the way that I can do this is I can take and come into my contact record, and I can go to here, and I can pick my, buttons actions. So button used to be the way that you would do this, and the button would let you put in a link, and you could specify the flow runtime. You don't have to do that anymore now. You know, this is actually a lot easier. And now all you have to do is hit new action. And one of the actions you can specify is a flow. So if I'm coming in here, I've got create new record, but I've also got this flow. You know, I can load it with a lightning component, or I can update an existing record as a type. I can do custom visual force pages. I can do the send email or log a call. But really what I want is a flow. Since I've already got a button here, I'm going to jump over to using this one instead. And so I've got my update contact information. And so here I have my flow. I've selected my flow here. I'm not using a standard label. I'm using a custom label so I can show whatever I want. And then, of course, the next thing is this has to be on the page layout. So here I can put this on my page layout, my contact layout. It's already been added. But now that it's there, it becomes available as one of these mobile and lightning components. And so I just drag it down in this section, and now suddenly I've got it available on my page. I can run this flow, and I can edit it from here. This is a really common use case for flows to give people a quick way to edit or update information. The other thing we can do, though, is we can actually do some lightning trickery here. So you'll notice here that I have this component page that's showing up there on the recommendations. I'll show you more about that one in just a second. But the nice thing is you actually have a flow component you can put in. And so you can specify a flow here, put your flow in. You can specify which flow you have. I want to create a case flow. I want to use my update contact information here. And I can specify one column or two columns. And record ID, the thing is I have to do this, pass record ID into this variable. So now this will automatically do that. I don't have to know that, I just pass it. The cool thing about this, though, is if I want them to do this when they have a record, I can actually say, specify this and go, all right, this one's been updated and, you know, the consent got captured this year, so I don't need that again. And so it'll only show that component when people need to do it. The other cool thing about flows, though, and let's jump back into this, is this actions and recommendations piece. And if you haven't used this before, there's a trailhead on it. What is this? Let's see. It is not easy to find. It is learn about Lightning Flow for service because they hide it in the service piece. But this is a really cool thing if you have not done it before. Under here, put our actions and recommendations. You can actually take and put stuff together. Now, they kind of assume this is for chat or for other stuff like that, but I've actually got a deployment that I made here. And now up under this deployment, I've called it Manage Contact. I'm giving it flows and quick actions. I can also choose recommendations or not include that. The nice thing is that flows and quick actions lets you put together a bunch of quick actions and other stuff like that into what amounts to a checklist of things that people do. And you can specify when a particular item is available. You can pick it on objects. I've got my contact object here, but maybe I wanted this on accounts. I could add it as well. I can pick in, and here's the catch. You've got chat, you've got phone, and default. Default is the one that's going to show up anywhere else. So chat is only going to show up in live chat options. Phone is only going to show up if you've got your an integrated phone provider. But default will show up anywhere that you stick this on a page. And so now that I've got it here, I can actually take and have it show this and be on the page and add it. So it would be available as an option for this person. And you can select the actions to add here from quick actions as well. So I've got these. And now when I look at this page, now I've got this here, but I've also got the other items here. So I can have them available as well as actually on the page. So some of these are just available, but they're not on the page. Some of them can be on the page. This is a really cool thing, though, to actually make it easy to let people do certain things on the actions. They can view an action, they can do stuff. Here, say you have a new contact and you want them to send an email with a very specific template. You can actually make a quick action that says, hey, all your new contacts, make sure you send them an email and stick it here. The nice thing is I've already done it on this one, but when you complete these, they can actually show as a checkbox. So this is a very cool thing. I highly recommend this. If you haven't checked into this, this is a really cool thing here on Actions and Recommendations. It's a great way to leverage your flows. Real quick here, I want to show some other kinds of flows here, though, because that's what we're here for, is kind of how do we use flow. I want to give you some ideas of things that you can do with flow. So I've built out a couple different scenarios here. So one of them is this email sale account owners. This is a scheduled flow. The nice thing about this scheduled flow is that it comes in and I can set it when it runs. I can specify this one started on August 25th and runs daily. It does a account object, and I can specify and I can pick my timing when it starts. I can do it daily, weekly, or only once. Once is nice if you have something you have to do, you really want it to happen. You want it to happen in an off-peak hours. You do that the once. If you've got a daily or weekly, those are regular routine things. In this case, I want it to happen weekly because I want my account owners to get a notice that they are delinquent in updating their contact information for various accounts. And I'm coming off the account object here. And the thing is, I'm giving it a criteria. Field days since last activity is greater than 90. Days since last activity. So one of the things about this is that your dates can't be relative. So there is a standard activity field here, and it's the last activity date equals specific date. It can't be relative, so I couldn't do the last 90 days. So instead what I did was I made a formula field on the object and said if the days since last activity, and I calculate the number of days since the last activity from that. And that's just a simple today minus last activity date. But now I can do a relative thing. So I can say anything that's over 90 days, it's going to email them. The get records. This is in here to make sure I'm getting the user records for the owners of those things. And here I'm coming in and I'm using an email action. And so from in this, I have specified some certain things. I've got the body. Notice this is a text template. So this is another resource type. We'll take a look at that in just a second. So within this particular, from the flow schedule, there is not a way to schedule it to run on just the quarter. There is actually another App Exchange app out there that lets you schedule flows to run at different times, but the default Salesforce one does not let you do flows like the first day of every quarter, unfortunately. However, the thing is you can potentially do a trigger of it and say, and your criteria is it runs once a month, and your criteria is that it is, it is December 1st is your start date, and your criteria would be that it's either January, April, August, September. It runs based on your quarter. So whatever your fiscal quarter is, you could specify and check the month as the date and the criteria and do it that way. That's a kind of easy workaround from that. You wouldn't do it in the scheduler. Instead, you'd actually kind of limit the records a little bit more and use it that way. So let's take a look at these text templates, because these are things that are kind of useful. Your email addresses that are coming in here, and again, this is coming from the getrecord.email. So this was from my user, so I could specify. Text templates, you'll see them here, and notice I turned this off from the auto layout here. In this case, I'm using a text template, and this is my subject. And it's just a rich text component. I can take and I can specify things. I can put in merge fields and other stuff like that, and it goes in the subject line. I can do insert. I can handle a couple different things as to how I do this. Same with the one for the body. Contact these people, please. So notice it's not quite inline, but I can actually do this and adjust it and get it to work where I can see these things. And so I can have this. This is an example of a scheduled flow. It's a really common circumstance. And you can actually add in as I mentioned, you can add in your criteria here, but you can also use a decision element, which will let you split and go down different paths. So an example that I did in one org of this was I actually had a decision that happened. And unfortunately, I'm in the wrong org for that. I had a decision that happened, and if it was between 90 and 180 days, it put a task in to contact them. If it was over 180 days, it emailed their supervisor and said, hey, your people aren't doing their job. So there's a couple things that you can do with this. After you get it in here, you can segment it even further into different paths. Let's look at a record triggered flow here. So you would actually do a, so this question here from Manjula, you can actually do a query inside of a flow. So you get the account records, and then you do another query to get the related records for them. And then you can actually update that from a cascading effect. You get the child records, and then you do that. It's a little bit more complex than what we have time to demo here today, but it's not an uncommon thing to actually update child records. So you do a flow that gets the parent record, and then you update the child records. That's actually kind of common circumstance of you want to update the owner. Maybe you update the owner in the flow and then have it correspondingly go through and say, okay, I want to change this, I want to change this, I want to change this. So you may want to update the opportunities, the cases, the contacts, but you may only want to update like the cases that are open as opposed to the cases that are closed, or opportunities that are open instead of closed. So you can do this with a second get records. You can actually go back and do another set of get records to update after the first one to get related records. Similar to how I did on this one, where I actually did this. The get records was happening here for the account records, but in this case, this get records ran for a completely different object. It went against the user based on the account owner field. So you can do multiple get records to get different types of related records and work through them. And then the other thing there is you can actually use a loop piece to go across them and update stuff. Let's look at here. What was the one I'm looking for? Oh, maybe this is the one I'm looking at that had that. Aha, here's the more robust one. So I'm splitting it with a decision and saying if it's 90 to 120 days, I email them. But here I can come in and go over 120 days and build a second email, and this is email their boss. And if it's less than 90 to 120 days, maybe I use the other one, and now I create a task for them to follow up with this person or this account. So here's some examples of what you can do with a lot of things. Let's look at this pre-save flow here for the account priority. So in this case, an example that I have is I basically come in, it happens when a record changes. So I've got my options here. It happens when a record is created or updated. It happens before the record is saved. This is kind of a key thing because you used to have to do a trigger for this. Process Builder is slow because it has to save the record first, then Process Builder fires, then it works through its stuff, then it saves the record again. And it may save multiple times over and over again. So this before save for a lot of things can come in and make things better. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm basically making a decision on their industry. Say it's an industry that we have certain product values in that's high. And here I've also got my criteria. So I've got them, they are an active account and they have a value that is greater than $1 million for my annual revenue. So if they're in an industry that we've got some good solutions for, you know, Salesforce industry is probably looking at something like this. I'm coming in and going, okay, we've got solutions already built for banking, communications, and manufacturing on our product. I want to set those as high value. And then I want to set these others as a lower value. So maybe they just go to medium for the priority, whereas the ones that are in industries that are higher value, they have a high annual revenue and they have this, it's here. Also, one of my favorite stupid Salesforce tricks that most people do not know. If we have a number field, $5 million. I can do it this way. 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And now I've got 5 million. Or I could type 5M. It also supports K, 5B. This is one of those tricks that like someone shows it to you and your entire life as a Salesforce user and admin just flashes before your eyes and you're like, I have lost so much of my life to this. It's a stupid trick. It's a stupid trick, but it's fantastic. I love this trick. Every time I show it to people, they're like, what? Wait, what? So that's one of my favorite. This is, I don't care how much you learned about Flow Builder from me, you learned a new trick that made your life just more efficient. So let's talk about here one of the other flows. And so I want to get into one that has a little bit of a looping to it. And where is my, all right, do I have it in here? Oh, it might be in a different org. All right. Okay, so let's talk about a different org here. Let me do this. So login.salesforce.com. This one may be an interesting experience here because this one's been upgraded. So you're going to see a different intro. So this is my GS0 org. You'll hear them talk about this. This one is going to be running in spring 21. So some flow stuff may look a little bit different here. But I have a flow in here that is actually a roll-up summary built with Flow. So let's take a look at this one here because this one shows nicely some stuff working with loops and your flows. And where is my count associated contacts? This is a roll-up summary in Flow. You know, you have your standard Salesforce roll-up summary fields, and then a lot of cases use Dolores, the DLRS tool, the declarative lookup roll-up summary. Andy Fawcett, who creates it, happens to hate the name Dolores for it, but everyone calls it that way because it's a lot shorter than DLRS or the full name for it. And then there's also roll-up helper. But if you really just need something quick and once, you can actually do this with record-triggered flows. So I start off with a record-triggered flow. I've got some criteria here that come into it. And now I'm looping across stuff. And so here's my nice thing. I'm getting my associated contacts on the account. Notice it starts from an account record, but I'm going to get all the contacts associated with it. And so this is the same thing as what I was talking about with you, Manjula. What I'm doing here is I've got my contact object selected instead, and it's everywhere the account ID equals the account record that started it. So this is the kind of flow that you could do to change the owner of all the records. You just do a different element of get contacts, get cases, get opportunities, et cetera, that you would work through with this. And the thing that I'm going to do a little bit differently with this is I'm not selecting only the first record. Now I'm selecting all records. What this means is now this is a collection because this is going to get every record that matches. And because I don't want to deal with the things that we used to have to do, and if you're new to Flow, this is much better. If you're not new to Flow, this is what you used to have to do. This is the uphill both ways in the snow kind of thing. You had to make a variable for every single thing on all the records you wanted to store. It was painful. And then came this thing where you could go, okay, I want to do it, but I just want to pick the fields that I'm doing. It was better. And then came this one, which is like, look, we know you're not going to do this. You're not going to keep this up to date. Just go ahead. And I'm just going to get those fields. And this is running my SOQL query. So let's look at what happens with the loop. So now I run this and I take it and I put it into my loop element here. I can select this and I've got my options of I'm running across a collection variable. Note it has to be a collection to do a loop. And then you can do first item to last item or last item to first item. And when you do that in your auto layout, what happens is it creates this lovely little spiral. And it runs through this way. And then when it's done after the last item, it exits and comes through here. So if we look at this, I've got an assignment variable here that is updating a variable called count of records. It's just a number variable that I created in here. And every time that it comes through here, it updates it. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add 1 to it. And now every time it comes through it, so it'll loop across every contact, every contact, every contact, and it's got through all the contacts. It's going to come down here, and then it's going to update this number. And here, notice I'm updating this field called number of contacts on the record. Again, it's my record that launched it. So this is one of my flow variables. I've got record here and number of contacts. And I can specify my variable here. Now I'm updating it, and now I'm saving my account record. And this is where we have a flow that is a roll-up summary. You do something similar to this to update, say, the opportunity owners and contact owners. What you would do is you do a get associated contacts, loop across it, and then instead of doing this update here, the variable, what you would do is just put in here, you'd add as your assignment, you have your current item from this loop, and you put the owner ID, and now you get it from the account record here, which is this one. All right, so I didn't grab it. So this is the account record here. And now I can set it to the owner field here on the account record. And it's going to make me do this here because this is a lookup. So I can come in and do this. And now I want my, not user role ID here. Okay. So now what would happen is this would update that contact as it runs. And then at the end, I'd have to put in an update element for update associated contacts, update associated opportunities, etc. But that's how I would do this. It's the same type of thing. You can add in multiple get records and save records to update those. Does that make sense on how to do the contact updates? Okay, so that is what I had for flows here and what I wanted to kind of demo and walk through and show some different things here on some stuff that you can do with flow. I want to talk a little bit about extending flow here real quick, and then we can go to anyone who has questions and want to discuss or other stuff like that. So one of the first things I want to share with you is this just freaking amazing site called Unofficial SF. And this comes from a lot of product managers at Salesforce and developer teams that are working on experimenting with stuff and need a place where they can give people feedback from it. You'll often see things come through here for testing and they're available early. You'll see things that get officially supported and go to Salesforce Labs. And then the other thing is there's also a lot of MVP and other community contributors who are adding stuff. So there's some really cool things you can do to extend your flows with this using Lightning components. So there are, for example, here, installable screen components. And this one has some vastly cool things that go along with it. So for example, here, when I mentioned you can change out your navigation and get stuff, well, there's actually some components out here that have been released where you can actually get your navigation, customize the footer, change the labels. Say you don't want it to say next or previous, you want to say forward and back, as opposed to that. You've got a custom footer here. You can now do a data table. This is the coolest thing ever. This is my favorite thing. Eric Smith, the MVP who created this, is just pure genius. You can put a data table in your flow that will let you see all those child records that you got on a screen element. So basically you just drag this lightning component in, you put it into your screen. He did this, the custom property editor. So this is what they're moving for. Remember when I said all things are clunky? Well, this is a whole lot better. So now you can do this configuration here. You can specify how it works, a lot of other things. The capabilities you can do with this, theming and applying colors and custom icons and other stuff like that in your data table here. You can make this very, very interactive. This used to require writing custom components, but now using this component together with its options and putting it into a flow, anyone can build a rich related list component that lets inline editing. Yes, that's right, inline editing. So you can do certain types of inline editing here on the record and show this as a related list. You can do a lot of formatting stuff here to change it. This is just generally a cool component. You can specify how you get your fields from a record. You can manually type them, etc. What do you have from the fields here? You've got a pick list provider of which fields you show. This is really cool and it's really quick. And now that he's put it in this new property editor, this thing is amazing. You can reference system fields in Flow. Yep. You can reference certain system fields in Flow. And others, you have to put them into a formula field. So when you look at your flow builder, let's get if I got a flow here, you can reference your system fields. And inside of here, we'll just do it on this one. Fault. This is the other thing. When you're doing get records and save records, sometimes it's a really good idea to do this thing of add a fault path. This is what happens when it doesn't go right. So from here, you can handle sending an error message, and maybe you send yourself an error message that's actually useful as opposed to the ones that come out of Flow, and say, hey, this flow broke and this person was running it and they did something wrong and these are the values. So you come in here, you can also make a log record. In some cases, I've done this with places where I actually created a log of error messages on flows, and I created a record on a custom object. So I can go in and I can report on it and go, all right, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and I can see it, the creating records there. But let's reference a system variable here. So I'm gonna create an error here, and I'm going to call it this. And you know what? I've got my, let's see, I've got a create a record from these values. I'm going to come in here. And the thing is, I can actually go record dot. Oh, wait, no, I have to do this, don't I? Not this one. Let's do this one here. So I can reference stuff and I can come in here. Say I want to do this. I can put stuff in and go, you know, this something like an update field, and I can reference here my system values. So some of these system fields, I can do origin, date, time. Thing is, these are often not as useful. So a lot of cases, what you do with your system fields is you actually create a resource and use a formula field. And so you can have this system or today. And this is now a coming out as date. And now, so now I can reference that system field of today or that system method of the formula today, and that just lives here in my flow and created it. So typically when you're talking about referencing stuff from system fields, from other properties, from the last modified and other stuff like that. Some cases you can reference them directly because they're on a record. Some cases you use them from a formula field. Back to the unofficial SF stuff here. Executing SQL query. This is actually kind of a cool thing. File previewer. You have someone upload an image to your next screen. You show them what that image was. Custom flow buttons. These are really cool for launching flows from different places. You can have select a flow from a list of flows. So this is a pick list that lets go, okay, I want to use this flow. I want to use this flow. This can actually be useful to create a single flow that's here and then lets them pick the subflows. So there's a lot of things that are here on this one. You've got next best actions. You can make it play a sound. Yes, it's possible to play sounds in Salesforce. We've got quick choice. This is one I actually really like because when people are choosing from a record set, instead of the pick list, you can actually specify going from a record and showing what these options are. So you can give them visual cues. You can put them into cards. So this is really useful for some cases if you have pick lists, because they can actually explain things to them and show them in different ways and let them select stuff from here's option 1, pick this if you have da 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 da. Here's option 2, pick this if it's blah 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 blah. So you can actually explain things, and especially in communities, this can be really useful to expose to end users and make it really valuable for them to see stuff. So these screen components are extremely useful. Notice there's a lot of them in here, a huge number of them in here. And then you have your installable actions. So this is actually some cool stuff here. These installable actions are things that you can do to customize. Here's an action that lets you calculate business hours. It's a pain in the backside to calculate business hours. This, from the Apex action, will automatically calculate it for you. You can also do compare to multi-select pick lists. If you really, really hate all the baby seals and want to club them, this is the thing for you. You can put multiple select pick lists there and compare and see what's different between them. Convert date to date time and back and forth, convert files to attachments, copy collection. There's a lot of different things here that can be really useful. Deep clone. This is a fantastic one. You want to create a clone of a record and you want to give them stuff to change. This deep clone can create the records and then give you the ability to edit them in the same flow. Filtering, find a record inside of a collection, generate collection report, generate flow link. There's lots of cool things here that are under this that can actually help you. But there's a lot of things here. Load a web page. Show maps that are related to stuff. Navigate to pretty much anywhere after this. When it completes, open a URL, play a sound, post a rich chatter. How many times you get asked to users to post a chatter or something like that, but they want to do rich text, and the stuff in their process builder and a lot of the others doesn't make it easy, and you can't format it in rich text, so you end up having to write in the HTML. Well, guess what? This one gives you a rich text component and lets you type in whatever you want and post it just like you would in chatter, which means it's easy to add emojis and other stuff to your automated chatter stuff. Send an email, show a toast message when you complete it, update the screen. There's lots of things here that make Flow way more powerful. I highly, 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 highly recommend this if you're digging into flows and trying to unlock that extra power. This unofficial SF is a fantastic place to go. The other thing of note is that the App Exchange has resources on Flow. And there are various Flow solutions here that are available, including some various templates, this thing called Flow Magic, which is a kind of a cool App Exchange piece that you've got. Other people are making stuff for Flow. So like, for example, Get Feedback. Make something so you can embed your Get Feedback forms into flows. Really easy. You can do things like change management at login. This is a cool little login flow to tell people what happened when you have a new release. Dashboard Pal, let people select which dashboard shows on the fly. So there's a lot of things here in these flow pieces that can be really, really useful for extending flow and working with all sorts of things that happen here. Omnichannel skill assignment, that's kind of a useful one. Case notification on email and community post. lightweight sign up registration form, basically. Flow error handling. This is a kind of basic one, but this is, as I said, this helps you track in your defaults. So this is one that's really useful in your fault tracking. You can actually use this to say, when there's an error, use this to help handle the error message. So this is a really cool one. I highly recommend being able to do this so you can know what happened, what was going on, including the error messages here, and send yourself some useful information and log it, not just get the really basic generic dumped message here. So I highly also recommend, if you're digging into flows, leveraging this to get further. And with that, any questions on flows? Because we are coming up on kind of the end time for the meeting here tonight.
Yes, I had a question, Mark.
Sure.
You did mention when you have a flow and you can create another version that you can work on it while the current one is still being used.
Yep.
How would that work in terms of, I guess, deployment? Do you just simply activate the new version and that deactivates it, or do you have to deactivate the old version and then activate it, or
Nope,
what?
you just hit activate on the new version and suddenly the new version is there.
Okay.
And quite frequently, that's a really common case. So for example, if you're deploying and you built it out in Sandbox and it was activated in Sandbox and you've had a current version there, one of your follow-up activities that you'll do when you deploy is activate the latest version of the flow in your production environment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, but as you can see, there's here, like for example, charging I mentioned, you can actually add a credit card terminal right into your flow to walk through. So say you have an upsell portion in your customer support where they go, well, this isn't supported by you, but we have this other service available. If you're using something like Chargent, you can actually put it right into your flow and say, here's your upsell script, and here's what you do to say, and here's the other stuff that you do, and add things in. But there's other stuff, round robin assigner. People frequently been like, well, how do I do round robin assignment? There's a million workarounds. Guess what? Flow has an easier thing to do that with. Swipey, this is the ubiquitous swipe left, swipe right, but people can actually do this visually to pick and go through their options on kind of pick lists and say, this is how I want to enter my information. And say, okay, I'm going to go with this. I dislike. And here I'm setting this and saving this all into, on the back end, coming into a multi-select pick list. Again, multi-select pick list. I don't like them, but they do have their uses for certain things. And you can set it all up declaratively and run through and give people who, say, maybe in a mobile experience, have an easier way to enter their information. So there's lots of cool things here. Anything else or questions? Did I put everyone to sleep? Are you also playing around to figure out how many different options there are around putting M or T or B or K or other stuff in for numbers?
I was looking at these options. I mean, there's so much you covered today. I think a lot of people here would be going back to this video to learn so many things again.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff around flow. I've actually done the same one as building them all, and it's a 3-hour session.
Wow.
For building all the ones that I've shown. So it's not an ideal circumstance to work with, but yes, there's a lot of things that you can do with flow. It is extremely, extremely powerful. And the thing is, like, this is the things that you can do as an admin now, or as a declarative developer, or even as a developer who just doesn't want to write code and wants to prototype something quickly, because I've been there before. I've written a Lightning component, and the first thing you do is you show it to the end user or the customer, and they're like, yeah, but can you make it do this? Can you make it do that? Can you change this text? Can you update this? Can you change this? And so a lot of cases now, like if it's not a performance sensitive thing, I start off by doing it in a flow first, and then get them to like work out the kinks and figure out what they want and other stuff like that. And then maybe I turn it into a Lightning component later. But most cases it's going to be a, kind of like just let them go and see the stuff and work with it quickly, where I can just quickly adjust and adapt and not have to get out my Visual Studio Code and change my code and write other stuff. So the 3-hour session that I recorded by the Akron, Ohio admin group, and I think they have the recording available in their Trailblazer community group. So.
Oh, okay, cool. I think that was the question that Wendy had.
Yeah, looks like
more about flows. Thank you, great. Thank you. Yeah.
It's the Akron, Ohio admin group.
Akron, Ohio. Do you know if they have a YouTube channel? Maybe.
I don't think they have a YouTube channel. I think it's in their Trailblazer community group.
Oh, okay. That's good.
I don't think she had. Let me see. Akron, Ohio admin group. I don't think they have anything. I think it's in their Trailblazer community. Yeah. So they don't have it here online and anything like that. They have a Trailblazer community group that's got it.
Oh, okay, so there must be a file there.
Yeah, so it's in the Trailblazer community group, and they're an open group, I believe, so you can get their recording from there in their chatter piece. I just haven't saved it anywhere that I have quick access to it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. This was really helpful. A lot of things I think I learned today, which I would have not seen it before too.
Yeah, a lot of people, and I'm working on my session stuff that I'm working on next year for stuff, and so maybe I can come back and do a repeat in the spring sometime of a session that is called when you're going with the flow, but your flow won't go. And it's literally a session on, like, these are things that come up routinely with flows, where they're broken, and how to troubleshoot and walk through them and debug them and all the other kind of good stuff that comes in.
That sounds good. We would love to have you back in spring to get the next part of the flow.
Yeah, so that's the the next thing. The other thing that I can suggest is those of you who are not in the Ohana Slack workspaces. If you're a Slack fan, there is a Salesforce Ohana Slack channel. It has a lot of stuff for process automation, and people can help and answer questions and when you get stuck. And it is free and open to anyone to join. You just kind of have to go through this link and follow the rules here that go along with it, because this is a Salesforce community type of thing, and it is a lot of people who are trying to come in and collaborate. And here's the history and the rules, but there's a lot of channels and a lot of different things. And so you can come in and access and get help with the let me find it here real quick. All right, so you can come in and see here the different types of groups. You've got your general, here's a bunch of them. The really ever popular processes, flows, and workflow rules. This is your automation stuff that you can get help with, and people come in and ask questions. There's also one for code development and all sorts of other channels in here, and you can get them all from here. I highly, highly recommend joining this and getting involved. This is a great place to ask questions, help other people, and just kind of generally have a good time connecting with people. So I highly recommend this group for anyone who's trying to get more involved in either community or just trying to get some help with stuff occasionally.
Wow, this is really helpful, and it's these user groups are all about community. It just helps so much when you share this knowledge, and we all can get together and learn more. It's all about creating that Ohana.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. This was an amazing session, and we're looking forward for having you back in spring.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else has any questions today?